They had no idea that the woman they were about to accuse of grand theft was the CEO who built the entire hospital from the ground up. When Dr. Imani Hayes walked into her own medical center wearing a hoodie, a wealthy donor screamed "thief" and demanded her arrest, not knowing she owned every brick in the building. Watch as an arrogant doctor threatens criminal charges against his own boss, as screens throughout the hospital reveal the shocking truth, and as the ultimate power reversal destroys careers and transforms an entire healthcare system. You're about to witness the most devastating case of mistaken identity in medical history, where assumptions about who belongs in healing spaces meet the brutal reality of who actually owns them. Stay until the Nightingale protocol activates the revelation will leave you speechless. They had no idea that the woman they were about to accuse of grand larceny was the visionary CEO whose $50 million donation had built every gleaming corridor, funded every life-saving machine, and created the very institution where they worked. Dr. Imani Hayes pulled her simple gray hoodie tighter against the morning chill as she walked through the automatic doors of the Finch Cardiovascular Center of Excellence, her sneakers silent against the Italian marble floors that she had personally selected during the hospital's construction 3 years ago. To the elegant donors sipping coffee in the VIP lounge, to the bustling medical staff focused on their morning rounds, to the security guards monitoring the pristine lobby, she looked like just another visitor. Perhaps a worried family member searching for a patient's room, or maybe someone who had wandered in from the community clinic next door. Her appearance was deliberately unremarkable. No designer clothing, no expensive jewelry, no obvious indicators of the wealth and authority that had transformed this struggling urban hospital into one of the nation's premier cardiac care facilities. But beneath that modest exterior was a brilliant physician and business strategist who had built Athlred Health Systems into a multi-billion-dollar network dedicated to providing world-class medical care regardless of a patient's background or ability to pay. Dr. Hayes had learned early in her career that the most devastating discrimination often occurred in spaces where life and death decisions were made, where unconscious bias could literally determine who received the best care and who was dismissed or overlooked. 3 weeks ago, an anonymous report had landed on her desk that made her blood run cold. Not a complaint about medical malpractice or patient safety, but something potentially more insidious. A pattern of missing items from the VIP wing, with whispered accusations consistently targeting visitors of color while wealthy white families moved freely through the same spaces without suspicion. The allegations were unsubstantiated, but they carried the unmistakable stench of institutional racism that Dr. Hayes had spent her career fighting to eliminate. So she had come here today not as the CEO making a scheduled inspection, but as an ordinary visitor conducting what she privately called Protocol Nightingale, a comprehensive test of her institution's character when no one thought the boss was watching. She wanted to see firsthand whether the values of dignity, respect, and equal treatment that she had insisted upon in every policy manual and training session were actually being practiced by her employees when they believed their actions wouldn't be scrutinized or reported. Her destination was a small, glass-enclosed display case in the center of the main lobby, housing what the hospital called the Founder's Chronograph, a priceless antique watch donated by the facility's original benefactor in 1952. The timepiece had become a symbol of the hospital's commitment to precision, excellence, and the precious nature of every moment in a patient's care. But today, that beautiful artifact would serve a different purpose entirely. As Dr. Hayes approached the display case, she knew that her simple clothing and the color of her skin would make her an immediate target for suspicion in the minds of people who had been conditioned to see certain combinations of appearance and race as inherently threatening. She pulled out her phone with steady hands and activated Protocol Nightingale, a sophisticated monitoring system that would document every interaction, every assumption, and every decision made in the next hour. The audit had begun, and Dr. Hayes was about to discover whether the institution she had poured her heart and fortune into building was worthy of the trust that patients placed in it every day. She was about to learn whether her employees understood that healing required not just medical expertise, but the kind of fundamental respect for human dignity that made true healthcare possible. What she didn't know was that the next hour would test not just her hospital's character, but her own resolve to ensure that the prejudices that had once limited her own opportunities would never be allowed to poison the sanctuary of healing she had created. If you believe that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, especially in places where their lives depend on it, hit that like button right now. Share this story with someone who understands that true healing requires more than medical expertise, requires seeing the humanity in every person who walks through those doors. Subscribe because you're about to witness what happens when assumptions about who belongs, where, meet the reality of who actually built the building. And trust me, you won't want to miss the moment when bias meets its own medicine. Right at that moment, as Dr. Hayes stood quietly admiring the craftsmanship of the antique timepiece that represented decades of medical excellence, the exact kind of prejudice she had come to investigate emerged from the shadows with devastating precision. Mr. Sterling Whitmore III, the hospital's most prominent donor and a man whose family name adorned 3 different wings of the facility, rounded the corner from the VIP lounge with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to having his every observation treated as gospel truth. Sterling's eyes swept across the lobby with the calculating assessment of someone who viewed the hospital not as a place of healing, but as an extension of his personal domain where his financial contributions granted him the authority to police who belonged and who didn't. When his gaze landed on Dr. Hayes, standing peacefully before the founder's display in her simple hoodie and jeans, his mind immediately leaped to the most damaging conclusion that decades of privilege and unconscious bias could produce. In Sterling's worldview, the equation was brutally simple. A casually dressed black woman near valuable items could only mean one thing, and his responsibility as a major benefactor was to protect the institution's assets from people who clearly didn't belong in such refined surroundings. The possibility that she might be there legitimately, that she might have every right to admire the historical artifacts, or that she might actually have contributed more to the hospital than he ever had, simply didn't register in his narrow understanding of who deserved to occupy elite spaces. Security. Sterling's voice exploded across the marble lobby like a gunshot, sharp and accusatory, causing conversations to halt and heads to turn throughout the expansive space. He strode toward Dr. Hayes with the kind of theatrical authority that suggested he was personally responsible for maintaining order in civilized society. This woman is trying to steal the founder's chronograph. I saw her fiddling with the display case lock. She was attempting to break into the case. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas, transforming the peaceful healing environment into a courtroom where Dr. Hayes had been instantly tried and convicted without evidence, without questions, and without the slightest consideration that Sterling's assumptions might be wrong. Patients in wheelchairs stopped moving, families visiting loved ones turned to stare, and medical staff throughout the lobby shifted their attention from their vital work to witness what Sterling was presenting as a criminal act in progress. Dr. Alistair Finch, the cardiovascular department's chief physician, and a man whose arrogance was matched only by his eagerness to please wealthy donors, rushed toward the commotion with the kind of urgent deference that revealed exactly where his priorities lay. Behind him hurried senior nurse Margaret Thompson, whose 20-year career had taught her that supporting the hospital's financial benefactors was more important than questioning their judgment, regardless of how unfounded their accusations might be. "Mr. Sterling, what's happened?" Dr. Finch asked breathlessly, his voice carrying the kind of immediate concern that he rarely showed for patients but always displayed for donors. His eyes barely glanced at Dr. Hayes, treating her not as a person deserving of consideration or respect, but as an object to be dealt with according to Sterling's wishes. This woman, Sterling repeated, jabbing his finger toward Dr. Hayes with a kind of aggressive gesture that was designed to dehumanize and intimidate, is a thief. She was trying to steal from us. From me, I witnessed her tampering with the security mechanisms on that display case with my own eyes. The lie was bold, complete, and delivered with the kind of absolute certainty that Sterling had learned would make people believe him regardless of the truth. He hadn't seen Dr. Hayes touch anything, hadn't witnessed any suspicious behavior, and had no evidence beyond his own prejudiced assumptions. But he understood that his word, backed by his financial contributions and social status, would carry more weight than the dignity of someone he had decided didn't belong in his hospital. Margaret Thompson nodded with the kind of automatic agreement that revealed how quickly medical professionals could abandon their oath to do no harm when faced with pressure from powerful donors. "We've been having issues with security lately," she added, providing validation for Sterling's baseless claims. "We have to be vigilant about protecting hospital property and maintaining the safety of our patients and their families." The network of prejudice was forming in real time, with each participant reinforcing the other's biases while building a case against Dr. Hayes based on nothing more than Sterling's toxic combination of entitlement and discrimination. They weren't investigating a crime, they were manufacturing one, using their positions of authority to transform peaceful observation into criminal intent through the dark alchemy of institutional racism. But what happened next would prove that some people's commitment to prejudice runs so deep that they're willing to weaponize their medical authority to enforce their narrow worldview about who belongs in healing spaces. Dr. Alistair Finch, without a moment of hesitation or professional reflection, turned his full attention to Dr. Hayes with the kind of venomous certainty that revealed how quickly a physician could abandon the fundamental principles of patient care when faced with the opportunity to please a wealthy donor. In Dr. Finch's mind, the calculation was devastatingly simple. Sterling Whitmore's family had contributed millions to the hospital's cardiac program, funding equipment that saved lives and research that advanced medical science. This woman in the hoodie, regardless of her actual identity or intentions, represented a potential threat to that crucial relationship. The choice between protecting Sterling's feelings and defending basic human dignity was no choice at all for someone whose career had been built on prioritizing power over principles. "Ma'am, doctor," Finch began, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension that transformed a healing professional into an instrument of discrimination. "Attempted theft of hospital property is a serious felony offense. I strongly suggest you explain yourself immediately before we are forced to involve law enforcement and pursue criminal charges." The threat was delivered with surgical precision, designed to intimidate Dr. Hayes into submission, while demonstrating to Sterling that his concerns were being taken seriously by the medical staff. "Doctor," Finch's tone carried the implicit assumption that Dr. Hayes was guilty until proven innocent, that her presence near valuable items was inherently suspicious, and that her explanation would need to overcome the presumption of criminality that her appearance had triggered in Sterling's privileged mind. Margaret Thompson stepped forward to provide institutional backup for Dr. Finch's aggressive approach, her nursing uniform lending medical authority to what was essentially a coordinated attack on an innocent person. "We've had significant issues with theft in this facility before," she announced, her voice carrying the false ring of professional concern masking personal bias. "Hospital security protocols require us to be extremely vigilant about protecting valuable assets, especially when suspicious behavior is observed by reliable witnesses." The language was carefully crafted to sound official and reasonable while containing devastating implications. By referring to Sterling as a reliable witness and Dr. Hayes's peaceful observation as suspicious behavior, Margaret was providing a veneer of medical professionalism to what was actually a textbook example of racial profiling in a healthcare setting. "Security should search her belongings immediately," Margaret continued, her suggestion escalating the situation from accusation to the kind of public humiliation that could traumatize anyone who had come seeking medical care for themselves or their loved ones. We need to ensure that nothing has been taken and that other patients and families feel safe in our facility. The irony was devastating and complete. Margaret was claiming concern for patient safety while actively creating an environment where certain patients and families would never feel safe again, where the color of someone's skin or the simplicity of their clothing could transform them from people seeking healing into criminal suspects worthy of public degradation. Dr. Finch nodded approvingly at Margaret's suggestion, his expression radiating the kind of self-righteous satisfaction that came from believing he was protecting important institutional interests. Absolutely correct, Nurse Thompson. Mr. Sterling's concerns must be taken seriously, and we have a responsibility to our donors and our patients to maintain the highest standards of security and integrity. The network of prejudice was operating with devastating efficiency, each participant validating the other's assumptions while building a case for treating Dr. Hayes as a criminal based on nothing more than Sterling's toxic combination of privilege and bias. They weren't investigating an alleged crime, they were prosecuting a predetermined verdict, using their positions of medical authority to transform healing space into a courtroom where justice was determined by social status rather than evidence. But what none of them realized was that their victim possessed something far more powerful than the patience to endure their discrimination. She possessed the authority to ensure that this moment would become a permanent lesson about the consequences of abandoning medical ethics in favor of donor appeasement. The test was revealing exactly what Dr. Hayes had feared most, that the institution she had built to heal all people was being corrupted by the very prejudices she had spent her career fighting to eliminate. The lobby had become an arena where medical professionalism was being sacrificed on the altar of prejudice, and everyone present was about to discover that some tests reveal more about the testers than they do about the people being tested. No one expected what happened next to completely shift the moral dynamics in that sterile lobby, proving that sometimes the most powerful voice for justice comes from someone who has everything to lose by speaking up. Just as Dr. Finch was motioning toward the security guards, and Margaret was preparing to conduct what would have been a humiliating public search, a calm but determined voice cut through the toxic atmosphere like a surgical scalpel separating healthy tissue from diseased. Dr. Finch, with all due respect, came the voice of Dr. Ben Carter, a third-year resident whose career was still fragile enough that challenging his department chief could end his medical future before it truly began. Perhaps we should review the security footage of the display case before we make such a serious accusation against this woman. Ben's intervention wasn't born from reckless courage or naive idealism. It came from the kind of moral clarity that had drawn him to medicine in the first place, the understanding that healing required more than technical skill. It required the fundamental respect for human dignity that he was watching being systematically destroyed by people who should have been protecting it. As someone who had grown up in a working-class family where dignity was often the only thing that couldn't be taken away, Ben recognized the cruelty of what was happening and couldn't remain silent. The display case is monitored by high-definition cameras 24 hours a day, Ben continued, his voice gaining strength despite the obvious risk he was taking. The system is directly connected to our central security station, and any tampering with the case triggers immediate alerts. If this woman had actually touched the case inappropriately, we would have documentation, not just accusations. The logic was unassailable, the reasoning was professional, and the suggestion was exactly what any responsible medical institution should have done before accusing someone of criminal behavior. But Dr. Finch's response revealed just how little interest he had in facts, evidence, or the basic procedures that should govern serious accusations in a professional healthcare environment. Dr. Finch spun toward Ben with the kind of fury that comes from having one's authority questioned in front of important donors. his face contorting with rage that had nothing to do with protecting hospital property and everything to do with maintaining his position in the hierarchy that Sterling's money had created. "Dr. Carter, doctor!" Finch snarled, his voice carrying the sharp edge of someone whose power was being challenged by someone he considered beneath his notice. "Your job here is to learn from your superiors, not to question my professional judgment or contradict the eyewitness testimony of Mr. Sterling, one of our most valued benefactors." The verbal assault was designed to humiliate Ben in front of the gathered crowd, to make him understand that challenging the wishes of wealthy donors was a career-ending mistake that would follow him throughout his medical training. Dr. Finch's message was clear. Loyalty to money was more important than loyalty to truth, and residents who couldn't understand that distinction had no future in his department. "Are you seriously suggesting that we should side with a common thief over the word of the man whose generosity has funded our cardiac wing, doctor?" Finch continued, his voice rising to ensure that everyone in the lobby understood the stakes of the confrontation. "Are you willing to jeopardize your medical career to defend someone who obviously doesn't belong in a facility like this?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud, designed to force Ben into submission through the threat of professional destruction. But Ben's response revealed the kind of character that distinguished true healers from people who merely practiced medicine for personal advancement. "I'm not siding with anyone, Dr. Finch," Ben replied quietly, his voice steady despite the obvious pressure and the career consequences he was risking. "I'm siding with procedure, with evidence, and with the basic professional standards that should govern how we treat every person who enters this hospital, regardless of their appearance or the assumptions that others might make about them." The distinction was crucial and devastating. Ben wasn't defending Dr. Hayes based on personal loyalty or emotional impulse. He was defending the fundamental principles that separated medical professionals from people who use their authority to enforce prejudice. His stance represented everything that Dr. Hayes had hoped to build into the culture of her institution, the understanding that healing required treating every person with dignity, respect, and the presumption of innocence until evidence proved otherwise. Margaret Thompson moved closer to Dr. Finch, her body language clearly indicating which side of the moral divide she had chosen. "Dr. Carter, you're overstepping your bounds," she said, her voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in nursing. "Mr. Sterling's concerns are legitimate, and questioning them is inappropriate for someone at your level." The lobby had become a battlefield where medical ethics were being tested in real time, and everyone present was being forced to choose between appeasing wealth and protecting dignity. The tension was electric. The stakes were career-defining, and the resolution would reveal the true character of every person involved. If you've ever seen someone risk everything to stand up for what's right, even when it could cost them their future, hit that like button right now. Share this story with someone who believes that moral courage should be rewarded, not punished. Subscribe because you're about to witness what happens when institutional prejudice meets someone with the power to change everything, and trust me, the revelation that's coming will restore your faith in justice and prove that sometimes the people we underestimate hold all the cards. But instead of allowing Ben's courage to de-escalate the situation, what happened next would prove that some people are so committed to their prejudices that they'll ignore both evidence and ethics to maintain their discriminatory agenda. Dr. Finch, his face still flushed with anger at being challenged by a junior resident, dismissed Ben's reasonable request for security footage with a wave of his hand that demonstrated his complete disregard for proper investigative procedures. "Dr. Carter, you've made your position abundantly clear, and it's been noted for your permanent record," Dr. Finch said, with the kind of cold authority that carried the implicit threat of career destruction. "Now step aside and allow security to handle this matter according to established protocols." Dr. Finch motioned decisively toward the hospital security guards who had been standing uncertainly at the edge of the confrontation, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension but trained to follow the directives of senior medical staff. "Officers, I want this woman detained immediately. She is a suspect in attempted grand larceny of hospital property, and I'm requesting that she be held for questioning by local law enforcement." The security guards, led by Officer Rodriguez, a veteran of 8 years protecting the hospital's patients and staff, approached Dr. Hayes with obvious reluctance. Everything about the situation felt wrong to Rodriguez's trained instincts. The accused woman showed none of the defensive behavior, nervous energy, or guilty reactions that typically characterized people caught in criminal acts. Instead, she maintained the kind of calm composure that suggested either complete innocence or the confidence of someone who possessed information that the accusers didn't have. As the guards moved closer, Dr. Hayes finally spoke for the first time since the confrontation began, her voice cutting through the hostile atmosphere with the kind of quiet authority that made everyone present pause and listen despite their preconceptions. "Officer Rodriguez," she said, reading his name tag with the casual precision of someone accustomed to remembering important details about people whose cooperation would be essential. "Before you take another step toward me, I want you to access your security terminal and run a level alpha authorization check on this name, Imani Hayes." The specificity of her request sent the first ripple of uncertainty through the gathered crowd. The terminology she was using, level alpha authorization, wasn't the language of someone trying to talk their way out of trouble. It was the precise technical vocabulary of someone intimately familiar with the hospital's security protocols and administrative hierarchy. "You have 60 seconds to complete that verification, Doctor," Hayes continued, her tone shifting from quiet calm to something that carried unmistakable command authority, "before I activate a facility-wide security lockdown from my end of the system." The threat was so specific and technically sophisticated that it stopped Officer Rodriguez cold. Hospital security lockdowns weren't something that random visitors knew about, much less something they could claim the ability to initiate. The protocols Dr. Hayes was referencing were restricted to the highest levels of hospital administration, and her casual mention of them suggested knowledge that fundamentally contradicted Sterling's accusations about her being a common thief. Dr. Finch stepped forward, his frustration evident as he tried to regain control of a situation that was spiraling beyond his understanding. "Officer Rodriguez, don't let this woman manipulate you with technical jargon. She's obviously desperate and trying to confuse the situation with nonsense about authorization levels and security procedures she couldn't possibly understand." But Rodriguez had worked hospital security long enough to recognize the difference between desperate bluffing and legitimate authority. The woman's demeanor, her knowledge of specific protocols, and most importantly, her complete lack of fear in the face of serious criminal accusations, suggested that she possessed information that would fundamentally change everyone's understanding of the situation. Margaret Thompson moved closer to Dr. Finch, her expression reflecting growing unease as she began to process the implications of what they were hearing. "Dr. Finch, perhaps we should verify her identity before we proceed any further. Hospital policy requires confirmation of accusations before involving law enforcement." "Nonsense, Doctor," Finch snapped, but his voice carried less conviction than it had moments earlier. "Mr. Sterling witnessed her criminal behavior, and that's sufficient evidence for detention and investigation." Sterling himself had remained silent during this exchange, but his expression was beginning to show the first cracks of uncertainty as he watched Dr. Hayes demonstrate knowledge and authority that didn't fit his preconceptions about who she was supposed to be. Officer Rodriguez looked from Dr. Finch to Dr. Hayes, understanding that his next decision would determine whether he would be remembered as someone who prevented injustice or someone who enabled it through willful ignorance of obvious warning signs that this situation was not what it appeared to be. What happened next would become the most documented hospital security verification in medical history, a moment when assumptions about authority, identity, and belonging would be shattered so completely that everyone present would question everything they thought they understood about power and prejudice in healthcare institutions. Officer Rodriguez, Sensing that his next decision could define his entire career, stepped toward his portable security terminal with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that he was about to either validate or destroy the accusations that had just torn through the hospital lobby like a tornado. With trembling fingers, Rodriguez input the name Imani Hayes into the Level Alpha Authorization Database. 2. A system he had used countless times for routine security checks, but never in circumstances this charged with tension and potential consequence. The seconds stretched like hours. As the system processed the query, cross-referencing the name against the hospital's most restricted administrative records. When the results appeared on his screen, Rodriguez's face went completely white, his expression shifting from professional uncertainty to pure horror as he realized the magnitude of what Dr. Finch, Sterling, and Margaret had just attempted to do. The authorization level displayed next to Dr. Hayes's name wasn't just Hyatt, was the highest possible classification in the entire Athlred Health Systems network. "Oh my God," Rodriguez whispered, his voice barely audible as he stared at the screen that was displaying information that made his blood run cold. He looked up at Dr. Hayes, then back at his terminal, then at Dr. Hayes again, as if he couldn't quite process the reality of what he was seeing. Rodriguez activated his radio with shaking hands, his voice carrying the kind of panic that comes from understanding that you've just witnessed a catastrophic institutional failure. The dispatcher's response crackled through the radio with crystal clarity, loud enough for everyone in the immediate vicinity to hear every devastating word. "Confirmed. That name is Dr. Imani Hayes, Chief Executive Officer of Athlred Health Systems. Her clearance is Level Alpha Plus, highest possible authorization. I repeat, Level Alpha Plus. Do not engage, do not detain. Await her direct instructions and compliance with any requests she may make." The words hit the gathered crowd like successive explosions, each revelation more devastating than the last. The woman they had been treating as a criminal was not only innocent, she was the ultimate authority over every person, every policy, and every decision made within the walls of the institution where they worked. But Dr. Hayes had an even more dramatic revelation planned, something that would ensure this moment was permanently etched into the memory of everyone present and everyone who would later hear about what happened in the lobby of the Finch Cardiovascular Center. Nightingale, she spoke softly into her phone, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that comes from having ultimate control over sophisticated systems. Activate Phase 2. At that exact moment, something unprecedented happened throughout the entire hospital facility. Every digital screen in the lobby, large waiting room televisions, the patient check-in monitors, the tablets in nurses' hands, the information displays above the reception desks, flickered and went completely black for 3 long seconds that felt like an eternity. Then, in perfect synchronization that could only have been orchestrated by someone with master-level access to the hospital's entire digital infrastructure, every screen lit up with brilliant clarity, displaying the official hospital welcome message that patients and families saw during normal operations, but with one crucial addition that changed everything. At the bottom of each screen, scrolling in bold letters that no one in the building could miss or ignore, appeared a message that sent shockwaves through every department. Executive Audit in Progress. Welcome, Dr. Imani Hayes, CEO, Athlred Health Systems. The effect was electric and absolute. Dr. Finch stood frozen, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the screens that were announcing to the entire hospital that he had just threatened to have the CEO arrested for theft. Sterling's face had gone ashen as he processed the reality that he had just publicly accused the hospital's owner of criminal behavior. Margaret Thompson appeared to be in complete shock, her 20 years of nursing experience providing no preparation for witnessing such a spectacular reversal of assumed authority. Throughout the hospital, staff members stopped what they were doing to stare at screens that were broadcasting the impossible truth. The woman who had been accused of theft was actually the person whose vision, leadership, and financial investment had created every job, every program, and every life-saving service they provided. Ben Carter, who had risked his career to defend Dr. Hayes based purely on principle, felt a mixture of vindication and awe, as he realized that his moral instincts had aligned him with the ultimate institutional authority. His willingness to challenge Dr. Finch's prejudiced rush to judgment had unknowingly placed him on the side of the person who controlled the entire healthcare system. The screens continued their scrolling message, ensuring that every person in the building understood that they were witnessing not just a case of mistaken identity, but a fundamental test of the institution's character that had revealed disturbing truths about how quickly medical professionals could abandon their ethical obligations when influenced by prejudice and donor pressure. But what happened next proved that true leadership isn't about delivering explosive vengeance. It's about transforming institutional failures into systematic accountability that ensures such failures never happen again. The lobby fell into a stunned, absolute silence that seemed to absorb even the ambient sounds of the hospital's life-saving equipment, as if the entire building was holding its breath while witnessing the complete inversion of every assumption that had driven the past hour of discrimination and accusation. Dr. Hayes rose from her position near the founder's display with the fluid grace of someone whose authority had never actually been in question, only temporarily hidden beneath a modest exterior that had exposed the true character of everyone around her. Her transformation wasn't physical. She was still wearing the same simple hoodie and jeans, but her presence now radiated the unmistakable power of someone who controlled every aspect of the institution where this moral catastrophe had just unfolded. "Mr. Sterling," Dr. Hayes said, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that made 300 people throughout the hospital stop what they were doing to listen through the PA system that was now broadcasting her words throughout the facility. "You just publicly accused the owner of this hospital of attempted grand theft. Your accusations were baseless, your behavior was discriminatory, and your assumption that financial contributions grant you the right to criminalize innocent people reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what this institution represents." The words landed with surgical precision, each sentence carefully crafted to ensure that Sterling understood not just his error, but the complete moral bankruptcy of his assumptions. Dr. Hayes wasn't simply correcting a mistake, he was delivering a comprehensive indictment of the prejudice that had transformed a healing space into a site of systematic discrimination. "Your donor privileges at this facility are permanently revoked," Dr. Hayes continued, her decision echoing through every speaker in the building. "Your name will be removed from the Sterling wing by tomorrow morning, and you will be escorted from these premises immediately. Our commitment to healing extends to protecting our patients and families from the kind of bias you have demonstrated today." Sterling's face cycled through shock, disbelief, and growing panic as he realized that his wealth and social status were powerless against someone whose authority was absolute and whose moral clarity was unshakable. The man who had entered the lobby believing he could control who belonged in healing spaces was being permanently expelled from those same spaces by the person whose vision had created them. Dr. Hayes then turned her attention to Dr. Finch and Margaret Thompson, her expression carrying the kind of measured evaluation that precedes life-changing decisions. "Dr. Finch, Nurse Thompson, you chose to believe baseless accusations over basic human dignity and established medical protocol. You weaponized your professional authority to enforce prejudice rather than protect patients. You represent a danger to the healing mission of this institution." The condemnation was comprehensive and devastating, delivered with the kind of clinical precision that left no room for denial or deflection. But Dr. Hayes's next words revealed that she understood the difference between punishment and transformation, between revenge and systematic reform. "Officer Rodriguez," Dr. Hayes said, acknowledging the security officer who had ultimately chosen procedure over prejudice, "please escort Mr. Sterling from the premises." Dr. Finch and Nurse Thompson will be meeting with me, Dr. Carter, and our head of legal affairs in my office immediately." The mention of Dr. Carter sent a ripple of understanding through the gathered crowd. The junior resident who had risked his career to defend principle over power was being elevated to participate in institutional decision-making at the highest level, his moral courage earning him a seat at the table where the hospital's future would be determined. But Dr. Hayes wasn't finished. Her voice carried throughout the hospital as she addressed not just those present in the lobby, but every employee who was listening through the facility-wide communication system. "Let this moment serve as a permanent reminder that healing requires more than medical expertise," she announced, her words becoming institutional doctrine in real time. "It requires the fundamental respect for human dignity that makes true healthcare possible. Anyone who cannot provide that respect has no place in our mission to serve all people with excellence, compassion, and equality." The transformation was complete and irreversible. Sterling's expulsion demonstrated that financial power couldn't override moral authority. Dr. Finch and Margaret's pending review showed that professional credentials couldn't protect those who abandoned their ethical obligations. And Dr. Carter's elevation proved that moral courage would always be rewarded over institutional compliance. The hospital screens continued displaying Dr. Hayes' identity, ensuring that every employee, patient, and visitor understood that they were witnessing the moment when stated values became lived values, when institutional rhetoric became institutional reality, and when the true meaning of healthcare leadership was demonstrated through the protection of those who had been most vulnerable to discrimination and abuse. But what happened next proved that the most powerful transformations don't just punish wrongdoing, they create permanent systems that ensure such wrongdoing becomes impossible to repeat. 3 days after Sterling's humiliating expulsion from the hospital he had once believed he controlled, Dr. Hayes convened an emergency board meeting that would reshape not just the Finch Cardiovascular Center, but serve as a model for healthcare institutions throughout the nation. The boardroom was packed with department heads, senior staff, and medical administrators who had spent 72 hours processing the reality that their CEO had conducted a sting operation that exposed systematic bias within their own ranks. But Dr. Hayes' response to the crisis would prove that true leadership means transforming individual failures into institutional strength. The events of Monday morning revealed something that I had hoped never to discover, Dr. Hayes began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room where careers and reputations hung in the balance. Discrimination and prejudice had infected our institution at multiple levels, from donors who believed their money granted them authority over human dignity, to medical professionals who abandoned their oath to do no harm in favor of appeasing wealthy contributors. The silence in the room was profound as everyone present understood they were witnessing the articulation of values that would govern their professional futures. Dr. Hayes wasn't just addressing past failures, she was establishing the foundation for permanent transformation. However, Dr. Hayes continued, "I believe in redemption through accountability, not destruction through punishment. Dr. Finch, you demonstrated catastrophic judgment in your willingness to criminalize an innocent person based on prejudiced assumptions. Therefore, you are being reassigned to lead our new patient trust initiative." The announcement sent shockwaves through the room, but Dr. Hayes' strategic thinking became clear as she explained the full scope of Dr. Finch's new responsibilities. "Your job will be to travel to every community clinic in our network, personally listen to every patient complaint about discrimination, investigate each incident thoroughly, and report your findings monthly to your new supervisor for this project, Dr. Ben Carter." The poetic justice was devastating and brilliant. The arrogant department chief who had rushed to criminalize Dr. Hayes would now spend his days confronting the consequences of bias and discrimination, under the supervision of the junior resident he had humiliated for defending basic human dignity. "Nurse Thompson will work alongside Dr. Finch in this initiative," Dr. Hayes added, ensuring that both participants in the discrimination would be directly involved in preventing future incidents. Together, you will help create a database of bias incidents that will inform our new Nightingale protocol. Dr. Hayes activated the wall-mounted presentation system, revealing detailed plans for a technology-driven accountability system that would monitor interactions, flag potential bias, and provide real-time intervention when discrimination was detected. The Nightingale protocol will be implemented across our entire health system, using artificial intelligence and human oversight to ensure that every patient receives care based on medical need, not appearance or assumptions. The scope of the transformation was breathtaking. What had started as a single incident of discrimination was being converted into a comprehensive system that would protect thousands of patients from similar treatment while creating new standards for healthcare equity. But Dr. Hayes' most symbolic gesture came when she announced the relocation of the founder's chronograph. The antique watch that served as the catalyst for Monday's events will be moved from the exclusive VIP wing to the main entrance of our community clinic, she declared, her decision carrying deep symbolic meaning. It will be accompanied by a new plaque reading, a reminder that time is precious for everyone. The relocation represented everything Dr. Hayes had fought to achieve, moving symbols of exclusivity into spaces of inclusion, ensuring that historical artifacts served all people rather than reinforcing hierarchies of access and privilege. Dr. Carter, whose moral courage had earned him rapid promotion to head the new Ethics Oversight Committee, would oversee implementation of all reforms while continuing his medical training under a special leadership development program that Dr. Hayes had created specifically to nurture principled healthcare professionals. 6 months later, the Patient Trust Initiative had documented and resolved over 200 incidents of discrimination across the health system, while the Nightingale Protocol had become the gold standard for bias prevention in healthcare institutions nationwide. Medical schools began using the case study of Dr. Hayes' sting operation to teach students about the intersection of healthcare ethics and social justice. The founder's chronograph, now displayed prominently where community clinic patients could admire its craftsmanship and read its message about the precious nature of time, served as a daily reminder that healing spaces must welcome everyone with equal dignity. Sterling's former wing had been renamed the Community Care Center, funded by donations from people who understood that true philanthropy meant expanding access rather than reinforcing exclusion. The transformation was complete, permanent, and far-reaching. Individual discrimination had become systematic accountability, personal prejudice had been converted into institutional protection, and one woman's strategic patience had created a model for healthcare equity that would benefit countless patients for generations to come. Here's what Dr. Hayes understood that most leaders never learn. The most powerful response to discrimination isn't exposing it privately, it's using it to create permanent systems that make discrimination impossible for everyone who comes after you. She could have revealed her identity immediately and embarrassed Sterling and Dr. Finch quietly. Instead, she let their prejudice fully expose itself while building the evidence needed to transform an entire healthcare system. As someone who's worked in hospital administration for over a decade, I can tell you that what happened in that lobby wasn't unicate, was just unusually well documented. The assumptions about who belongs in healing spaces, the deference to wealthy donors over patient dignity, the willingness of medical professionals to abandon ethics for financial appeasement happens in healthcare facilities across the country every single day. But Dr. Hayes' response created something unprecedented, proof that bias in healthcare isn't just morally wrong, it's institutionally destructive. The Nightingale Protocol didn't just prevent future discrimination, it demonstrated that protecting human dignity actually improves medical outcomes and institutional excellence. The real lesson here isn't about having the resources to own hospitals or the authority to fire discriminatory staff. It's about understanding that your response to injustice can either end with you or begin with you. Dr. Hayes chose to transform her personal experience of bias into systematic protection for thousands of patients who will never know her name but will benefit from her courage. The Patient Trust Initiative proved that redemption through accountability works better than punishment through destruction. Dr. Finch's transformation from arrogant discriminator to bias investigator showed that even the most prejudiced minds can be redirected toward justice when consequences meet education. If you believe that healing spaces should welcome everyone with equal dignity, and that moral courage should always triumph over financial influence, smash that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters in fighting institutional bias. Subscribe for more stories where strategic leadership meets unshakable principles, where individual courage creates systematic change, and where doing the right thing doesn't just feel good, it transforms entire industries for the better.